If you listen to a lot of true crime podcasts or watch a lot of true crime channels like this one, you're probably under the impression that while some cases might get more attention than others, there are a lot of unsolved cases out there. And you would be right. For example, between 1980 and 2023, there were over 792,000 known homicides, but not even 294,000 of those have actually been solved. The exact figure sits at about 63% in total. In going through cold cases to highlight for my videos, there's an overwhelmingly large pool to choose from. But I think at times it's important to highlight why it's so vital to continue talking about the unsolved, and why it's vital not to give up searching for answers even when all hope seems to be lost. So for this video, I put together a short list of 4 cold cases that were finally solved decades later.
Who can help me say?
The date was December 19th, 1979. Westdale Town Center, then known as the Westdale Mall, had only been open for around 2 months. On that day, 18-year-old Michelle Martinko went Christmas shopping. It was a cold night, only about 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and she left shortly before the mall closed at 10 p.m. She returned to her car, parked somewhat far from the mall's entrance, and sat for a while, likely waiting for the frost on the windows to melt. Shortly after sitting down, an unknown assailant entered her car. Michelle was stabbed 29 times, all over her body but mostly around her face, and killed. There were no witnesses to her murder. The crime scene showed extreme overkill, and Michelle maintained many defensive wounds, having put up a desperate struggle to fight off her attacker. There was evidence from imprinting on the car's exterior that the killer had worn rubber gloves in an attempt to conceal their identity. Early suspicion focused on people close to Michelle, who was popular and particularly well liked at school and in her social circle. Harsh speculation fell on her ex-boyfriend, Andy Seidel, who took their breakup after 2 years of dating very hard and was known for being very possessive of Michelle, going so far as to follow her around and ask others about her personal life. At Michelle's funeral, he was inconsolable, hugging her in her casket and asking others if she still loved him when she died. Although questioned extensively, Seidel had an alibi and no physical evidence tied him to the crime. With no witnesses, fingerprints, or strong suspects, the case went cold by the mid-1980s. In 2005, the case was revived when detectives realized that blood found on the car's gearshift and Michelle's dress contained male DNA, evidence that had never been fully pursued due to technical limitations at the time. The DNA did not match anyone in national criminal databases when tested, prompting investigators to collect samples from over 100 people connected to Michelle, including Andy Seidel, who could finally be definitively cleared as a suspect. The investigation gained new momentum in 2015 when Detective Matt Denlinger, son of one of the original investigators, took over the case. Advances in forensics allowed the DNA to be used for phenotyping, a process that can create a profile based on genetic information, which informed the investigation that the suspect was a white male with blonde hair and blue eyes. Later, using a public DNA database, investigators identified a distant relative of the killer and built an extensive family tree that eventually narrowed the suspect pool to 3 brothers in Iowa. The investigators collected DNA from the brothers covertly. They came across Jerry Burns, one of the brothers, eating at a pizza restaurant and took his discarded straw for lab testing. His DNA was an exact match. Burns had no criminal record, no known connection to Michelle, and was a respected family man, making him a surprising suspect. In 2018, nearly 39 years after the murder, Burns was confronted, denied his involvement, and was arrested. At trial in 2020, the prosecution argued that the DNA found at the crime scene could only belong to the killer. After just a few hours of deliberation, Jerry Burns was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The conviction brought long-awaited closure to Michelle's family and friends. It's been widely emphasized that Michelle's resistance during the attack was what led to the killer likely cutting himself and leaving DNA at the crime scene, which in turn finally led to the case being solved. Up next is a case that took place in Buena Vista, Colorado. I don't see this one talked about very often, and I think it's partially because there's not much readily available information out there regarding the details of this crime, or maybe the other way around. In the summer of 1977, 17-year-old Audrey Hurtado went to visit her sister and brother-in-law in Buena Vista, herself being from Cokedale, Colorado, which is about 200 miles away. She'd been staying with her sister Dolores for about a week, when one day, on July 28th, she left Dolores' home with an unidentified young man that she had met earlier that day at a local park. She told Dolores that she was going on a walk with him. But when Audrey failed to return home later that night, Dolores and her husband Floyd quickly informed police and began their own search, alongside two of Audrey and Dolores' brothers. They distributed flyers and offered a reward for any possible information regarding Audrey's whereabouts. Police treated Audrey's disappearance as a likely runaway case. However, 2 days later, on the afternoon of July 30th, Audrey's body was found in a heavily wooded horse pasture by a man who had been planning on purchasing the plot of land from a local couple. Audrey was fully dressed and had been stabbed numerous times in the arms, chest, and stomach. Eyewitnesses confirmed having seen Audrey walking with a man on the evening of her disappearance, who carried a hunting knife on his belt and was described as being 5 feet 8 inches tall, with a medium build and wearing a light brown afro-style haircut. He appeared to be in his early 20s. It was also reported that 2 small children had seen a struggle in the wooded area where Audrey's body had been found, and had told their mother that they'd heard a girl scream. The mother dismissed this story, but later reported this to police after the discovery of Audrey's body. A composite sketch of the person of interest in Audrey's killing was created and distributed by the police. They received many tips on the potential suspect and interviewed multiple people. One such person, their primary suspect, was only 15 years old at the time, and thus only identified to the public as CK. CK lived in California, but was visiting family just a block away from Dolores' house where Audrey had been staying. Sometime before the murder occurred, CK stole a knife from a nearby sporting goods store, but was forced by his family to return it when they had found out. Later it was found out that a similar knife was stolen from the same store, but was never returned. This second knife was consistent with the type of knife police identified to have been used in Audrey's killing. On account of A being a minor and B living out of state, police had difficulty keeping CK in custody, and ultimately were unable to find strong enough evidence to tie him to the murder. He was released, police still keeping track of his whereabouts, until 1981 when he was killed in a motorcycle accident in his home state of California. Audrey Hurtado's case remained cold for 39 years, until police found a breakthrough in 2016. DNA had been collected from underneath Audrey's fingernails and been preserved. It was tested against DNA from a couple of CK's surviving relatives, and it was found to be entirely consistent with CK's genetic information. CK was posthumously named Audrey's killer, and after nearly 4 decades, the case was finally brought to a close. Vickie Belk was a 28-year-old mother to a young son and an employee at the Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C. The morning of August 28, 1979 was just like any other, and it being a Tuesday, Vickie was working. To commute to work, Vickie and her boyfriend James Hill would drive to the Stadium Armory station, where they left their car and took a train to their respective offices. Because she planned on running errands that afternoon, Vickie told James that she would return to the station to take the car during lunch, and that she would meet him in the same parking lot after her break. The time came and went, and even as night rolled around, there was no sign of Vickie or even their car. James checked with Vickie's friends and family, anybody who might know of her whereabouts, but nobody seemed to know where she had gone. James reported her as missing the next morning. Just 1 day later, a teenager was riding his bike along a country road in Bryans Road, Maryland, when he came across Vickie's half-naked body and reported it to the police. She'd been abducted from a parking lot not far from the Stadium Armory station in D.C., sexually assaulted, shot in the head, and dumped on the side of the road. As a child, Vickie had been among the first Black students to integrate Alexandria, Virginia's public schools during the Civil Rights era. She later became the first in her family to graduate college. Her life was a promising one, and her killing devastated her family, particularly her young son Lamont, who was 7 at the time. Although investigators preserved physical evidence from the crime scene, DNA technology did not exist at the time. Early forensic testing in the 2000s identified a partial semen profile from evidence collected at the scene, but it wasn't enough to generate a match. Vickie Belk's case, as a result, sat cold for more than 4 decades after her death. As forensic science advanced, the evidence was retested in 2022, producing a usable DNA profile that matched Andre Taylor, a Washington, D.C. man whose DNA had been entered into the National CODIS database following later arrests. Taylor was only 18 in 1979 and had no known connection to Vickie Belk. Detectives discovered that he did, however, have ties to Charles County, living near where Belk's body was found. In 2024, investigators confirmed the match with a new DNA sample and arrested Taylor, who had been living in a nursing facility in poor health. Taylor in his defense asserted that he had assaulted Vickie, but that a friend of his had been the one to kill her. This claim was proven to be a lie, and Audrey Taylor was tried and sentenced to life in prison without parole for Vickie Belk's sexual assault and murder. Our fourth and final case comes from a gruesome discovery made in a normal suburban home on Long Island. In September of 1999, a homeowner in Jericho, New York, opened a 350-pound steel drum that trash collectors had refused to remove because of its weight. The drum had been sitting in his basement in the house that he had owned for years, untouched until today as he tried to dispose of it. As soon as the lid was removed, an overwhelming stench flooded out. Inside were the mummified remains of a young pregnant woman and her near full-term unborn son. The drum had been hidden in that basement crawlspace for more than 30 years, passing unnoticed between multiple homeowners. The woman had suffered multiple severe blunt force traumas to the head, indicating a violent homicide. Early forensic analysis revealed that she was likely Hispanic, in her 20s, and had a few golden teeth from unusual dental work that suggested she was from somewhere in South America. Investigators also discovered jewelry, a purse submerged in a greenish liquid, plastic pellets, and parts of artificial flowers inside the drum. The drum itself was traced to a chemical manufacturer, linking it to industrial use. Investigators managed to trace the drum and plastic materials to Howard Elkins, a former plastics executive who had owned the house in the 1960s and co-owned a Manhattan company that manufactured artificial plants using the same pellets and green dye found in the drum. An anonymous tip to the police claimed that Elkins was known to have been having an affair with a young Hispanic employee many years prior. When questioned by police, Elkins repeatedly denied this and refused a DNA swab. After police warned him that they would obtain a court order to test whether he was the father of the unborn child, Elkins left, purchased a shotgun, went into his neighbor's garage, and shot himself. DNA testing later confirmed with 99% probability that Elkins was the father of the decedent's child. Advanced forensic examination recovered faint names and addresses from a badly damaged address book found in the woman's purse. The victim's identity was finally confirmed through the recovered address book entry that led investigators to Kathy Andrade, who still had the same phone number and who identified her missing friend as Reyna Angelica Marroquín, a fellow Salvadoran immigrant who had vanished in the late 1960s. Marroquín had been working at Elkins' plastics factory, had an affair with him, and became pregnant with his child. One day, Kathy received a frantic phone call from Reyna that she had made a mistake, that she had spoken to the wife of her child's father about the affair, and that he was furious. She feared that he was going to kill her and begged Kathy to come over. Kathy left her home and went to see Reyna. When she entered her apartment, she found the door ajar, a freshly cooked dinner still warm on the stove, no sense of disturbance, but absolutely nobody in sight. She waited for 4 hours for Reyna to return, and went to the police when she never did. They told Kathy that since she wasn't related to Reyna, she couldn't file a missing persons report. Investigators believe Elkins lured Reyna to the factory, beat her to death, placed her body in the drum weighted with plastic pellets, and intended to dump it into the ocean. Unable to move the drum due to its weight, however, he concealed it beneath his home where it remained undiscovered for decades, even after he'd moved away. Reyna's family in El Salvador was found and informed of her passing. Her mother, now 95, had wondered and been heartbroken for years after Reyna suddenly stopped writing to her family over 30 years ago. She had dreamt of Reyna over and over again as the years went on, and had even had recurring dreams of Reyna trapped in a barrel. Reyna's mother passed away shortly after the family was informed of Reyna's death, and the two were buried together. A final note found in the drum, another piece of evidence believed to have been written by Reyna herself, read, "Don't be mad I told the truth."
Thank God that she had rest in peace now, and the rest of the family.
Audrey's brother never gave up hope his sister's murder would be solved, even though the pain consumed him over the years.
Thank you. Again, my name is Judy Belk, and Vickie was my big sister. Thank you for caring and for providing us a little bit of closure.
Because I had covered this case for so long, I had a deep caring for the victim. I wanted to know more about her. I felt almost like it was someone in my family who had been lost. This is right after I first broke the news to the mother about Reyna.
She fought so hard that she caused the murderer to cut himself. He left his DNA, and so Michelle helped solve her own murder.
It can be difficult for anyone who consumes a lot of true crime media to see silver linings anywhere in the brutality we often come across. In truth, it's hard to see anything tied to such inhumanity as a silver lining, whether a case ends up being solved or not. But for the sake of the families and friends that victims leave behind, it's really important to remember that spreading the word about cold cases and other unsolved crimes is never in vain. It was only through tireless efforts that the killers of the 4 victims we talked about today were brought to justice. If through unrelenting exposure even one more victim's story can be told and their killer brought to light, then at least to me that's never a wasted effort.